My name is Sophie. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 7 years I have lived inside a beautiful, perfectly arranged photograph. Our house, a minimalist structure of glass and pale wood on a quiet street in a suburb that prided itself on its quiet streets, was the frame. My husband David was the stoic, handsome figure at the center. Our daughter, 5-year-old Lily, was the splash of vibrant, innocent color. And I was the soft focus background, the tasteful decor that made everything else look good. Tonight I was preparing a beef bourguignon, a rich, complicated dish that took hours. The kind of dish we used to make together on lazy Sundays, laughing as we splashed red wine into the pot and onto each other. Now, I cooked it alone. The scent of simmering beef and herbs filled the silent, open-plan kitchen. Everything was in its place. The German knives were magnetically attached to a strip on the wall, perfectly aligned. The spice jars were alphabetized. David was a senior portfolio manager. His world revolved around order patterns and predictable outcomes. He had built our life with the same meticulous precision he used to build investment portfolios for the wealthy. It was a life of guaranteed returns, insulated from risk. It was a good life. Everyone said so. My friends, my mother, even the other mothers at Lily's preschool. "You're so lucky, Sophie," they'd say. "David is such a great husband. So steady." And he was. He was steady. As steady as the sun rising in the east. He left for work at 7:30 every morning, his tie knotted perfectly, a kiss placed on Lily's forehead, and a perfunctory peck on my cheek. He returned at 6:30 every evening. He would ask Lily about her day, listen with genuine interest as she described a drawing of a purple cat. He would help with her bath time if I asked. After she was asleep, we would eat dinner, discuss logistics, a leaky faucet, an upcoming parent-teacher conference. Then he would retreat to his study to review market reports, and I would clean the kitchen. He was a good man. A wonderful father. He never raised his voice. He never complained. And that was the problem. The steady rhythm of our life had become a flat line in my soul. I felt a weird, humming restlessness, a loneliness that was all the more painful because I was never actually alone. I was just unseen. David looked at me, but he saw the manager of his household, the mother of his child, a reliable component in the well-oiled machine of his life. He hadn't truly seen me, the woman he fell in love with, in years. That night, I had bought a new dress. An emerald green silk slip dress. It was simple, elegant, and utterly impractical for my life of school runs and grocery shopping. A friend was having an opening at her art gallery, and for the first time in a long time, I wanted to feel like more than just a wife and a mother. I put it on just before he got home, the cool fabric a shock against my skin. When I heard his keys in the door, my heart gave a hopeful little flutter. He came in, went through the usual motions. The kiss for Lily, the briefcase set down by the door. I stood in the archway between the living room and the kitchen. "What do you think?" I asked, doing a small, awkward turn. He looked up from loosening his tie. His eyes scanned the dress for a fraction of a second. "Looks nice, Soph," he said, his voice the same placid tone he used to discuss stock fluctuations. "Have a good time?" That was it. No lingering glance. No spark of desire. Just a polite, efficient acknowledgement before his mind moved on to the next item on his mental checklist. The hopeful flutter in my chest died, replaced by a cold, hollow ache. The art gallery was the complete opposite of my home. It was loud, chaotic, and pulsating with life. Colors screamed from canvases, wine flowed freely, and the air was thick with the sound of passionate, overlapping conversations about things that didn't involve plumbing or school districts. I felt like a ghost at first, sipping my Chardonnay and pretending to study a painting that looked like a blue square. I was out of my element, an artifact from a different, quieter world. That's when he appeared beside me. "He's trying to say that conformity is the death of the soul, but he's doing it in the most conformist way possible," a low, amused voice said. I turned. He was a musician I'd seen playing in the corner earlier, his guitar case now leaning against the wall. He had dark, messy hair, eyes the color of whiskey, and a smile that seemed to know a secret I didn't. "I thought it was just a blue square," I said, and he laughed. A real throaty laugh. "I'm Reese," he said, holding out a hand. "Sophie." We talked for what felt like hours. He didn't ask what my husband did for a living. He asked what music made me feel alive. He asked about the half-finished novel I'd once started writing in college. He noticed the tiny silver moon pendant I wore, a gift from my grandmother that David hadn't commented on in years. You have a very expressive face, Reese told me, his eyes locked on mine. I can see a whole story in there, but you keep it hidden. With every glass of wine, he brought me a layer of the perfectly composed suburban wife peeled away. I found myself laughing, really laughing from my belly. I told him about my dream of traveling through Spain, a dream I hadn't spoken aloud since before Lily was born. He didn't say, "That sounds difficult to plan." He said, "You should do it. I can picture you there with the sun in your hair." He made me feel interesting. He made me feel seen. When he touched my arm, a jolt of electricity, sharp and unfamiliar, shot through me. It was the kind of feeling I thought had been permanently retired, packed away with my pre-marriage wardrobe. He leaned in, his voice, a murmur against my ear. "You're the most beautiful thing in this room, Sophie." I knew where the night was heading. Every alarm bell in my head, conditioned by 7 years of routine and responsibility, was screaming. But they were drowned out by a single, desperate thought: for one night, I don't want to be invisible. I don't remember much about his apartment, only that it was messy and filled with books and music sheets. What I remember is the way he looked at me. Like I was a masterpiece. Like he was memorizing every line of my face. I remember the feeling of his hands on me, attentive and hungry, and the shocking, exhilarating sensation of being the absolute center of someone's universe. In the gray light of dawn, riding home in a taxi, the intoxicating haze began to wear off, replaced by the sharp sting of reality. Guilt clawed at my throat. I thought of David and Lily asleep in our perfect quiet house. But underneath the guilt was something else, a strange, defiant clarity. I had broken the rules. I had shattered the perfect photograph. And as the taxi pulled into our driveway, I made a decision. I wouldn't lie. I wouldn't sneak around. Our marriage was suffocating in silence and unspoken truths. Maybe a terrible, brutal truth was what we needed to finally breathe again. I would tell him everything. I believed with a desperate, naive conviction that this act of radical honesty would be the shock to the system our marriage needed. It would force us to confront the cracks in our foundation. It would hurt, but we would rebuild. We had to. We had 7 years and a beautiful daughter. That had to count for something. He was already awake. He sat at the kitchen table, a mug of black coffee cupped in his hands, still in his pajamas. The morning light streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He looked up as I walked in, his expression unreadable. My heart hammered against my ribs. "David," I began, my voice trembling. I sat down opposite him. The polished oak table felt like a vast empty chasm between us. "I need to tell you something. And I need you to just listen until I'm finished." He didn't nod, didn't speak. He just watched me, his gaze steady. And so I told him. I told him about feeling invisible, about the suffocating predictability, about the party. I told him about Reese, about how good it felt to be seen, to be desired. I didn't spare myself. I laid my mistake bare on the table between us, a raw, ugly thing. I cried as I spoke, the words catching in my throat. It didn't mean anything. I finished, my voice a desperate whisper. It wasn't about him. It was about me. About us. About this silence we've been living in. I know I broke everything. But maybe we can fix it. Together. I waited for the explosion, for the shouting, the accusations, the anger. I was braced for a storm. But the storm never came. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes still on my face. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, he carefully placed his mug on the table, aligning it perfectly with the edge of his placemat. He looked directly at me, and for the first time, I saw an emotion in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was nothing. A complete and terrifying void. "I understand," he said, his voice perfectly level. I felt a surge of foolish relief. "David, we can." He cut me off, his tone unchanged. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, clean and sharp as a shard of glass. I stared at him, convinced I had misheard. "What? No. David, don't say that. You're hurt, you're angry. Let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," he said. He stood up, rinsed his coffee mug in the sink, and placed it in the dishwasher. His movements were calm, deliberate, as if he were tidying up after a minor spill. That was the beginning of the silence. That night, he gathered his pillows and the duvet from our bed and moved into the small study downstairs. He did it without a word. When I tried to talk to him, to plead with him, he simply walked around me as if I were a piece of furniture he had to navigate. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. Our beautiful minimalist house became a soundproof prison. We coexisted in the same space, two ghosts haunting the same halls. The only time he spoke was when it concerned Lily. "I'm taking Lily to the park," he would state, not looking at me. "Lily's dentist appointment is on Tuesday," he would inform the empty air in my general direction. He never used my name again. I tried everything. I begged. I cried. I wrote him long, soul-bearing letters that I left on his closed study door only to find them untouched the next morning. I cooked elaborate meals, his old favorites. He would make himself a sandwich and eat it alone in his office. In my mind, I began to build a narrative around his silence. It wasn't indifference. It was pain. A pain so profound it had stolen his words. This wasn't him giving up. This was his way of processing the betrayal. He was punishing me, yes, but punishment implied that the crime still mattered. The silence, I told myself, was a testament to how much he had loved me. If he didn't care, he would have just left. He was testing me. He was testing my remorse, my commitment. I just had to endure it. I had to prove to him that I was willing to fight for us even when he couldn't. This became my mantra, the fragile belief I clung to as I navigated the crushing emptiness of my own home. The architecture of our new life was built on silence and separation. It became methodical. He bought a small, separate refrigerator for the garage where he kept his own milk and eggs. He started doing his own laundry on Sundays, his basket of clothes kept distinctly apart from the family hamper. He was a master of compartmentalization. With Lily, he was the same loving, attentive father he had always been. He would sit on the floor with her for hours building elaborate Lego castles, his voice warm and patient. The moment I walked into the room, a curtain would fall. The warmth would vanish. He wouldn't stop playing, but the energy would shift, the air growing thick and cold. Lily, in her innocent, perceptive way, started to notice. "Why is Daddy sleeping in his office?" she asked one night as I tucked her in. "Daddy's just working very hard, sweetie." I lied, my throat tight. My desperation escalated. One evening after Lily was asleep, I found him in the kitchen, getting a glass of water. I stood in the doorway, blocking his exit. "Please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Just yell at me. Scream at me. Call me horrible names. Anything. Just say something to me." He looked at me, his face a mask of cold composure. "You're upsetting yourself," he said, his voice flat. He sidestepped me and walked back to his study, the soft click of the door shutting behind him, echoing in the silent house. That night, I made my last, most humiliating attempt. I put on a silk negligee I hadn't worn in years. I went to his study and knocked softly. There was no answer. I opened the door. He was sitting at his desk, staring at his computer screen. He didn't look up. "David," I said, my voice barely audible. He continued typing. I might as well have been a shadow on the wall. I stood there for a full minute, the flimsy silk feeling like a suit of armor made of shame. Then I turned, walked back to our vast empty bedroom and cried until I had no tears left. Even then, my delusional hope persisted. It twisted his cruelty into a complex emotional test. He was pushing me away to see if I would stay. His coldness wasn't the absence of love. It was love's wounded, defensive posture. I just had to be patient. I had to weather the winter. Spring would come. It had to. Months bled into one another. 6 of them. A half a year of living with a ghost. I had adapted to the silence, learned its contours and its weight. I no longer tried to force a conversation. I simply existed in my prescribed orbit, managing the house, caring for Lily and waiting for a sign. A thaw. Anything. Then one Thursday evening it came. I was cleaning the kitchen after dinner when David walked in. He placed a thick manila folder on the polished granite countertop. It landed with a soft, final thud. My heart leaped. This was it. Maybe it was information on marriage counseling. Maybe it was a plan, a list of things we needed to work on. "What is this?" I asked, my voice filled with a fragile, trembling hope. For the first time in 6 months, he looked directly at me. His eyes weren't empty anymore. They were just tired. Incredibly tired. "Those are the divorce papers, Sophie," he said. His voice was quiet, devoid of anger or malice. It was the voice of a man stating a simple, unchangeable fact, like the time of day. I stared at the folder, then back at him, my mind refusing to process his words. No, I don't understand. I thought we were working through this. The silence. I thought you were punishing me, making me wait. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. It was the most emotion I had seen from him in half a year, and it broke my heart. You thought that, he said gently, but we weren't. I wasn't punishing you. He took a slow breath. The moment you told me what you did, our marriage was over. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an ending. There was nothing left to say. Yelling, screaming, what would have been the point? It wouldn't have changed anything. I finally understood. The cold dread that washed over me was absolute. So why, I stammered, gesturing around the silent house. Why stay here? Why do all of this? For Lily, he said simply. I stayed to make the transition as smooth as possible for her. I didn't want to just walk out. I needed time to find a new place to get our finances separated, to talk to a lawyer, and draw up a fair custody agreement. I did all of that. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The silence wasn't a punishment, Sophie. It was a process. It was the sound of me leaving. The foundation of the narrative I had so carefully constructed for myself crumbled into dust. The test of endurance, the profound pain, the hope of reconciliation, it was all a fantasy. A story I told myself, so I wouldn't have to face the devastatingly simple truth. He hadn't been punishing me. He had been erasing me, methodically, quietly, efficiently. He had already packed most of his personal belongings, taking a small box with him to the office each day. I had been so lost in my own drama, I hadn't even noticed. He had been gone for months, I just hadn't realized it yet. He picked up a small duffel bag from the hallway that I hadn't seen before. He went to Lily's room, kissed his sleeping daughter goodbye, his shoulders shaking for just a moment. Then he walked to the front door. He turned back to look at me one last time. There was no hatred in his eyes, no anger, no love, just the polite, distant look one gives a stranger. Goodbye, Sophie. The door clicked shut behind him. I stood alone in the center of my perfect kitchen, in my perfect house. The only sound was the familiar hum of the refrigerator. But the silence he left behind was different. It wasn't heavy with unspoken words or the promise of a future storm. It was just empty, an echo in a space where a life used to be.